Hey folks, thanks for watching. It's September 2nd, and I usually start with this kind of continental US radar map. It's a little bit more quiet here this morning, not uncommon for early September here, outside of tropical activity. We haven't quite got to the point where we see these kind of big fall winter waves coming through the US yet, but we do see some showers moving through Minnesota, kind of getting more southeast toward Wisconsin at about 6 a.m. as the recording of this video. Some showers moving through the middle Mississippi River Valley, but these aren't very strong right now. I kind of wish they were a little bit stronger. We'll talk a little bit a few slides about the drought, or at least this dry stretch that has settled into this corridor here over the last 30 days. If you look closely, I know it's kind of hard to see on the video, but we do see some returns here, even getting into the lower Colorado River Valley. Some showers here near the Phoenix metro area, just light kind of returns on radar here this morning, but some of these may be making it to the ground with some drops getting in. We do have a cutoff low just west of California that I'm going to talk about in a few slides. That has implications not only for the west, I think some rainfall that the southwest could see over the next 48 hours, but even through the 7, maybe to like 8-day forecast when we're talking about the southern plains. We jump over and we can even see some of those radar returns just kind of from ag weather across the southwest, the middle Mississippi River Valley, and then those that we mentioned up in Minnesota here. The radar map was a little bit more interesting this weekend, just over the Labor Day weekend. Jump over and show you the last 72 hours of precipitation. Some impressive amounts getting in here into eastern Nebraska near Omaha, along the Missouri River, and portions of East Texas. I mean, the text we have on here is these big cities like Houston, Dallas can see 4 inches, 2.5 here. There were some localized areas in between that got well over 4 inches, maybe even like 7 to 8 inches this weekend. So it was a busy weekend for the central and southern plains, relatively quiet outside it. I was watching closely. These storms were kind of going up here and trying to push east, but they were kind of frustratingly weakening as they got toward Missouri. And we know there's this big dry area in here stretching kind of east up toward New England. In fact, if I just jump over and show you the last 30 days of precipitation anomaly on that map, zoom that in, and you can see like Columbia all the way through portions of the Ohio River Valley, the middle Mississippi River Valley toward the eastern Corn Belt up into New England. I mean, it's been an impressive dry stretch over the last 30 days, really that whole month of August. If I pick on, like I mentioned, Columbia, because I was kind of rooting for rainfall to get further east, and it just never did, maybe a few droplets. But if you look over the last 30 days at their year-to-date rainfall, it's just like a flat line, big plateau. In fact, the last 1-inch rainfall, we have that plotted here, was all the way back on like July 21st. So it's been a number of days now since we've had appreciable rain through a pretty wide area. I mentioned Columbia, but you can stretch it all the way east toward like Maine. Now, in the forecast for Missouri specifically, you can see a little blip here in the forecast in just a few days. We're going to talk about some of those rainfall chances here, but I want to showcase just how dry we've been. A more interesting view this morning, if we look over in the eastern Pacific, where we've seen a little bit more tropical activity as the Atlantic has kind of predictably quieted down here a bit in early September, have seen the eastern Pacific light up a bit. We do have Hurricane Kiko that's well off into the Atlantic here. Maybe next week as a kind of remnant system nearing Hawaii that they'll have to keep an eye on for some rain and gusty winds. But at least for the continental U.S. forecast, I'm keeping my eye on this kind of bubbling area here. We do see some stronger coastal thunderstorms. Those aren't uncommon kind of in the late summer, early fall period. But that little spin, do you see that little spin in the clouds here? The National Hurricane Center identifying that as Tropical Depression 12. And their forecast is that's going to strengthen into a storm likely today or tomorrow, before bending east back toward the continent, where it could bring some of this tropical moisture up into the southern plains or even the southwest. We can actually see this forecast scenario. I'm going to jump over to the GFS. That's a little bit more in line with that National Hurricane Center forecast. Here's this morning, but as I take this into this afternoon, you can see it quickly strengthening toward tropical storm strength. This is into tomorrow morning, definitely at or near that tropical storm strength as of Wednesday morning, 24 hours from now. And then bending, bringing, look at all that tropical moisture heading up into like southeastern Arizona, southern New Mexico. This is Friday now. And it's going to get some of that even into West Texas and southern Oklahoma over this weekend. And it's going to kind of team up with this little cutoff flow that's bringing those showers that we mentioned to the southwest and could put us on tap at least for portions of Texas, Oklahoma, the southern U.S. for some more intense rainfall as we go into the weekend and early next week. We'll look at that exact forecast in just a minute here. But these tropics, a little bit closer to home, can have implications even in the eastern Pacific for our forecast in the southern U.S. I did mention the Atlantic quieting down here a bit in early September. If we look across the basin, that's the case. No obvious systems or storms here. If we do look over in the what we call the main development region, that's this corridor here in the central Atlantic, where a lot of these storms initially bubble up. I do have something of a system to keep an eye on here. The National Hurricane Center has identified it with a 60% chance of formation over the next 7 days. What's kind of curious, when I was watching the potential scenarios for this, we do this often with the ECMWF ensemble because it runs so many different members. And I'll take this forecast back to like when I was doing this morning. Let's do, here's Tuesday morning. So there's that like little weak system. Now I'm going to play the forecast. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. And now we're into like Friday, now Saturday. I mean, we're a number of days out at this point, 4 or 5 days. There's Sunday, Monday. And then let's do Tuesday at the same exact time next week. And when I do that, let's take it back. I want to get it almost like exactly, even like a week out. It has only moved, that far across the central Atlantic. That's a whole week. And a number of these kind of ensemble tracks strengthen it a bit to the point where we might have some sort of tropical system, maybe even can't rule out a hurricane at this point next week heading toward the Lesser Antilles. You can see how slow how long we have to watch these systems. I mean, that was a full week, and it's not, even imminently threatening land at this point, save for the Lesser Antilles, which it maybe is another day or two out from. So the system's moving slowly. We'll have plenty of time to watch it, but it is something to keep an eye on. But, almost, more interesting to me is just how slow that kind of development in that track is. And it's indicative of some, fairly weak trade winds that have settled in across the central Atlantic right now. In part due to a Bermuda high that's maybe been a little bit weaker here this week, but it has interesting to see how weak those trade winds are. If you want to find some stronger trade winds, well, we can look at this in these Hofmuller diagrams that Eric and I often show. And what we see here is in blue is where we have more easterly wind anomalies. And those tell us where those strongest trade winds across the globe are. And if we kind of line that up with the map down here, with these bluer colors, where they've been in the past, where they are in the forecast below the black line, well, we see most of them are in the central or west Pacific, either going backwards over the last 30 days or going forward over the next 15. If we look over here, closer to the Atlantic, not as many of those blue colors. Maybe a little blip here currently in the forecast, but by and large, weaker trade winds in the Atlantic compared to the Pacific. And that's just indicative of this broader kind of La Nina influence that we've seen pick up over the last 15 to 20 days. And if I just go and compare, these are the trade winds moving across the central and western Pacific right now. See that strong stretch, easterly winds all the way across the equator here, helping to upwell some of that cooler water. If we look over at those sea surface temperature anomalies, we're warm here in the central Atlantic. We have those weaker trades, and we're cool here in the central Pacific. So again, that La Nina signature showing up in a number of different ways, even kind of in these little hurricane track forecasts. And then even if we jump down and show you the La Nina indice right now, so index for whether we're in El Nino or La Nina. If we're in El Nino, we're typically up here above about 0.5 degrees Celsius. And if we're below 0.5 degrees Celsius down here into that kind of La Nina territory, we will await to see, maybe this month, usually the second week of the month, September, Climate Prediction Center puts out their ENSO update. We'll see if they officially call this La Nina or not, or whether they wait till October. But I mean, it's kind of semantics. This is looking pretty La Nina-like as we head into winter of 25. I want to give us a broader view of that jet stream level flow, more so across North America here. We mentioned last week the development of this potential Omega block. And if we look at the jet stream flow west of the continent here, we have this upper level low here that spins into this upper level ridge north of it. We can kind of follow the flow back around to this other cutoff low just to the east. The reason I'm doing that, you can kind of see that Greek letter Omega that I just drew out. I'll kind of do that again. If you follow that flow, see kind of that Greek letter Omega. There's that Omega block, as we call it, kind of rightly named. And that tends to keep this pattern in the central and eastern U.S. lingering for a number of days, even at times weeks. So if you have kind of felt this persistent cool forecast in the central and eastern U.S., that is part of the reason why. Now, just to the west of this trough that has settled in over the central and eastern U.S., we do have a ridge out here that's bringing some heat to the northwest. But really the kind of big key feature of this map that I'm looking at is this more potent shortwave trough kind of embedded in this larger, we call this long wave trough here. And that's going to be diving down through this week into the upper Midwest. And maybe it's going to be our biggest weather maker for this corridor here. In the southern U.S., the southern plains, watching this cutoff flow here over California. We mentioned that may be teaming up with this next tropical system coming through, and that's going to bring some heavy rain potential in the forecast of the southern U.S. We can see that if we look at the ECMWF forecast for precipitation. Let me restart that here. Let's do this about 6 a.m. Tuesday. I'm going to take this forecast and through this afternoon, and there's that low pressure system near Lake Superior. This is into tonight, and some rainfall to the upper Midwest. We saw those showers here this morning. If I take the forecast into tomorrow, Wednesday evening, see that low spins up over Ontario, and it leaves this cold front here across Chicago. Now looking, there's central Missouri, southern Iowa, getting into central Illinois, some precipitation along this cold front here. It's not going to be a lot, but it is going to be, I think, at least measurable, above a 1/4 inch, but below an inch of rainfall here. That passes overnight into Thursday morning. And by Thursday afternoon, that low spinning up here. Even look at these, even some snowfall, P-types getting in there. And that cold front now lingering across the middle Mississippi Valley through eastern Kentucky, now West Virginia. Decent rainfall chances through the eastern Corn Belt. So a corridor here that has been dry, getting a decent rain chance. Again, it's a quick moving cold front, so it's not going to be this widespread heavy rainfall, but it is pretty high confidence that some rainfall will be moving in through this corridor here. You can even see another kind of backside low moving around that trough there. So take this into early Friday morning, and now let's get into Friday afternoon. Another kind of quick system here through the middle Mississippi River Valley, Missouri, southern Illinois. So this low kind of just spins here. These systems move around it. What we are seeing through the forecast, we saw some initial kind of over the next 48 hours, some light showers and precipitation, some thunderstorms trying to get into the southwest. That activity picks up more so this weekend as that cutoff low starts to track through the Four Corners region. You can see that here Friday afternoon with more shower and thunderstorm activity over the Four Corners. So we get into Saturday, moving just a little bit further east. I now see this front lingering and draped all the way across the kind of the southeast, through the Appalachians into the New England area, bringing better rainfall chances there. Again, this is an area that's been included in the dryness over the last 30 days. Take the forecast into Sunday. Now Texas, seeing that cutoff low as it tracks slowly across. Rainfall chances picking up. This is now into Monday. Additional rainfall chances for the High Plains, the Cap Rock, Gulf Coast states. And then maybe a little bit of a system to watch next week. This is now Tuesday, all the way out to September 9th, a week from now. Some signal for a system both for the upper Midwest and then those cutoff flows that we mentioned as part of that Omega block, trying to get over toward the Pacific Northwest. Next week, you can see that all the way Wednesday of next week at this point. An area that, we don't see a ton of precipitation here is maybe this corridor here that did get that quick moving front, but otherwise not a lot of precipitation elsewhere in the forecast. We can see that over the next 7 days, just looking at the ECMWF precipitation anomaly. So the corridor along that upper level low that was moving through the Four Corners, better rainfall values expected in the forecast here underneath that developing low pressure system across Ontario. But that cold front that quickly moves through here. We are expecting rain over the next 7 days in this corridor here, but it's not enough to even get us to average for this time of year. You get further east, maybe toward Kentucky, the eastern Corn Belt, New England, better rainfall values just as that kind of cold front gathers up along some of the elevation here, some better rainfall getting out of it. If we look at that just in terms of absolute precip over the next 7 days from the WPC, again, you can see decent rainfall chances in here, but it's not getting up toward an inch plus, say for maybe parts over here in Pennsylvania and New England. We're talking half an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch if we're lucky in kind of the central and eastern Corn Belt here as that cold front moves through. Better chances for appreciable rain across the southern plains. Some question of how far west it gets up into kind of the West Texas, the High Plains here. I think decent chances that a wide area of Texas and Oklahoma see good rainfall in the next 7 days. If we try to make this more exclusively next week, that is a 4 to 10 day forecast at this point from the ECMWF, looking at the 6th through the 12th of September. You can see now we see that cutoff low moving through the southern U.S. better, so Texas, Oklahoma, through the lower middle Mississippi River Valley. I'm hoping to see this kind of push a little bit further north into some of those drier areas that we mentioned along the Ohio River Valley, but still kind of unfortunately avoiding that maybe northern Indiana, central Illinois, central Missouri, and eastern Iowa dry corridor that we mentioned earlier. There's that Pacific Northwest activity as well. Obviously, another big component to this, as we see this low pressure system spin here and pull that cold front across, is the cooler temperatures. This is just looking at the National Weather Service, the high temperature forecast today. On Tuesday, you can see that heat across the northwest, central, and eastern Washington. We've been talking about so much heat out there over the last kind of 2 to 3 weeks. That continues tomorrow on Wednesday, but boy, the influence of that cold front already apparent in those high temperatures dropping down into the 60s, low 60s for the Dakotas tomorrow. High temperatures on Thursday, those 60s push further across the Midwest, You can see that cold front from Pennsylvania through the Tennessee Valley and through Oklahoma. The heat remains out west, but it's starting to come down in California and the desert southwest as that upper level low comes on shore. See a better example of that on Friday with those high temperatures. And now at this point, the cold front pushing further east, but you can see that cold front struggling to get into the southern U.S. by Friday. On Saturday, more widespread cool down. Now that upper level low positioned across the Four Corners region, bringing temperatures down to a wide area. Sunday and now Monday, better cool down across much of the eastern continental U.S. before we start to warm back up behind this system Monday and Tuesday next week for the Dakotas. Low temperatures probably bottoming out. I'm going to take this quickly into the forecast. Really see that cold stretch settle in Saturday, Sunday. The widespread 40s. You can even see a 39 up there by Fargo. I mean, impressive early September cool down on the heels of an impressive late August cool down. So seeing those cool temperatures settle in, thanks to that omega block, just kind of keeping this temperature pattern in place for the next few days, let alone maybe even through early next week. I'm looking out in the forecast for a change in that forecast, a change from this persistent cool pattern. I did land on this view. This is a pressure anomaly forecast from the ECMWF. I'm taking the forecast all the way out to the middle of next week. So this is Wednesday, September 10th. And what I'm looking at here is the strength of the Bermuda high that we often do in that kind of 10 to 15 day range. Now, if I take this forecast to the 10th where I have it now, you can at least see this Bermuda high stretching all the way back across into the continental U.S., maybe centered here over the Azores. We sometimes call it an Azores high. Those are these little islands here in the eastern Atlantic. There's Bermuda right here, but you can at least see a stronger, more coherent Bermuda high all the way across the Atlantic. Whereas if I take the forecast forward to where we're at this morning, I should say backwards to where we're at this morning, you can see it's more centered just over the Azores. It doesn't have that Bermuda piece to it. And so as the forecast goes forward now, there we go, there's the right direction, all the way out till the 10th, we can finally draw a flow around this clockwise back up into the central U.S. So some hints that at least getting out into the middle to late part of next week that we're going to return better flow out of the south, which you'd think bring up warmer temperatures and maybe better precipitation chances for the central U.S. If we look at our temperature grid, which we have here on ag weather, at least looking out to the 10 to 15 days, that is the ECMWF ensemble on the top, the GFS ensemble in the middle, and then the AFS down here on the bottom. Still see a little bit of that warm up in some of these forecasts, maybe not so much from the AFS, but at least from the ECMWF ensemble and the GFS, maybe a little bit of a warm up here in the central U.S., but still by and large, I mean, the eastern U.S., looking seasonal to maybe even cooler than average if they're reset all the way back to the top. But maybe even cooler than average if we're going to believe the AFS here. So no kind of strong warm signal yet in the forecast, but maybe not quite as cool as we saw heading into the latter part of August or early September here. The Climate Prediction Center a little bit more bullish on that warmth and their 8 to 14 day outlook. So this is the 9th through the 15th of September. You can see better chances for at least returning back to normal September temperatures, maybe even above average for portions of the Great Plains in the southern and southeastern U.S. Eric talked about this yesterday. I'm going to mention it quickly here. This MJO forecast, we have a little bit of a fork in the road, as we often do, looking at the Madden-Julian oscillation, and that over the next kind of 7 to 10 days, curious if this gets out into phase 1 or phase 2 proper here. There is some question as to whether it might just stay in null space. And we can see this a little bit if we jump over and look from the ECMWF at this ascent over the tropics. We usually see if the MJO is going to move into phase 1 or 2, better ascent in this region here, maybe even over here toward Africa. But we see green colors essentially start to pop up in those regions there. And if I take this forecast out into the future, even like to the 10th and 11th, we just don't really see, a proper phase 1 looking at this kind of tropical or equatorial ascent from the ECMWF forecast here. And that kind of lines up with the fact that we're not really seeing like a proper phase 1 or phase 2 that would maybe be more supportive of Atlantic storms getting out toward the middle of the month. So that has been kind of the dates that we've been eyeing, maybe like September 10th through the 20th for an uptick in this Atlantic hurricane activity, which is currently relatively quiet. I do think we will see something of an uptick because if we just look at the suppression over the Atlantic, it's stronger here at the beginning of this forecast compared to the end of it. And the MJO is not going to, totally nix every system. It's more of just kind of a background personality state, if you will, for the tropics. But it might tamp down some of the higher end potential that this season maybe had, given that we're in the peak of it right now. I'll finish up here. Eric mentioned kind of the long-range forecast yesterday, updated with the latest CPC. The only thing I'll say is I was looking at the 15-day precipitation anomaly forecast from the ECMWF ensemble. This takes us all the way from today, September 2nd, out through September 17th. And it's relatively dry across the central and eastern U.S. If I could point out some wet areas, okay, maybe the upper Midwest toward Ontario, the southern plains, we mentioned that's wet in the forecast here, and then generally maybe kind of the western quarter of the country here. And I was looking at that, and it started to remind me of a map that we were looking at a lot in August, but kind of dismissing a little bit, and that was the extended ECMWF forecast. So this is just the ECMWF ensemble. It goes out 15 days, but that extended forecast, as we were looking at it in mid to late August, was actually calling for a pattern in September that didn't look too dissimilar from this. And I actually went back and looked all the way from August 19th, which was like almost 2 weeks ago at this point. This was the 30-day forecast for the month of September. And kind of curiously, it was wet in areas of the southern plains, wet in the upper Midwest, but dry elsewhere. And then maybe wet in that kind of western quarter. Wet here across the Gulf Coast states. Compare that to the current updated forecast, right? Doesn't look too dissimilar. So we dismissed the ECMWF extended off in the summer because it wasn't performing well, frankly. But that's not uncommon for these long-range models to not perform well in the summer convective kind of thunderstorm regime, where it's harder to pin down that daily forecast. It's harder to pin down the 30-day forecast, just kind of naturally. So what we might be seeing here is the ECMWF gaining some skill back as we go into kind of the autumn regime here. So gives us an example of, well, maybe let's not discount that long-range ECMWF forecast as much anymore. And we just kind of jump over and look, let's do like September 15th through August 15th. And it keeps that dry trend going, that kind of persistence that we've seen through the end of August and now into early September here. So I'm not going to dismiss this the same way that we did in August, given maybe some improved skill here from the ECMWF. Where it is wet is the Pacific Northwest, Gulf Coast states. It continues to highlight this area here in the Bay of Campeche that if we do get a big storm in the Gulf later this year, again, just want to keep an eye down here for some of these homegrown systems as we get further out into this hurricane season here. Especially concerned maybe for some storm getting out into the Gulf as we go forward through the end part of September. We'll keep an eye on all that going forward. The only thing I'll mention kind of long-term going into winter here, Eric, I don't think you touched on this yesterday, touched on just about everything else in that seasonal forecast, but one thing we do keep an eye on is something called the quasi-biennial oscillation. Given I'm at the end of the video here today, I'm not going to dive into like the depths and the details of it, but essentially it is this kind of predictable changing of the winds in the very upper levels of our atmosphere, actually looking all the way up into the stratosphere here. And what we see this winter is a likely reentrance into what we call the negative QBO phase. And all we mean by that is we typically build back in these easterly wind anomalies in the stratosphere going into this winter, given just kind of the past oscillation that we watch with this index here. And again, I'm not going to go into every detail of it, but what we are keeping an eye on is when we do see these kind of easterly or negative QBO events in winter, they tend to more often than not disrupt the polar vortex, and that more often than not tends to produce kind of more interesting winters with some of these kind of cold air outbreaks, maybe not totally dissimilar from what we saw last winter at times. So that is going to be something we'll keep an eye on. I know Eric mentioned that polar vortex yesterday. As that develops this winter, right, potential disruptions to that, what we call sometimes these sudden stratospheric warmings, can help to produce those cold air outbreaks that end up causing so much inclement weather across the continental U.S., which tend to make that, right, these like all hazards map, which are very quiet right now, just light up with all sorts of advisories, watches, and warnings. But that is a number of months away. We'll get to it when we get to it. That's for today on Tuesday. Thanks for watching.